On my first day of work, I noticed a picture of my husband on a colleague's desk. I smiled and asked her, "Who's this?" She replied smugly, "That's my boyfriend. We've been together for 3 years and plan to get married at the end of the year." On the first day I stepped into my new company, I told myself I had to stay calm. A new beginning at 32 is no simple thing, but I believed I was strong enough. My name is Hannah. I had just accepted the position of Senior Marketing Director at a rising tech company in San Francisco called Innovatech Solutions. I had been through many battles in my career, stood before multi-million-dollar plans, and sat in meetings with the most difficult people. I thought nothing in an office could make me lose control. I was wrong. My desk was next to a frosted glass partition. On the other side sat a young woman with a gentle demeanor, her long hair softly curled, her makeup just right, a faint scent of perfume in the air. She turned to greet me with a radiant smile, so friendly it could easily put anyone at ease. "You must be Hannah, right? I'm Chloe, your project assistant on the team. Welcome to Innovatech." I smiled and shook her hand. "Hi, Chloe. I hope we'll work well together." I said this as I placed my bag on the chair and pulled out my laptop. My mind was already running through a list of tasks. Get a handle on the projects, review the budget, read the market research, schedule a team meeting. But my eyes were unconsciously drawn to Chloe's desk. Not because she was beautiful or because of the way she smiled, but because of a picture frame placed in the left corner next to a small potted plant. The silver-edged frame was wiped so clean it reflected the overhead lights, as if its owner cherished it every day. In that photo was my husband. I wasn't mistaken. It was impossible to be mistaken. The man in the dark blue shirt, with his familiar tilted smile, the dimple on his left cheek, his eyes looking straight at the camera with a mix of warmth and confidence. That was Michael, my husband, the man who just last night had been in the kitchen making me pasta, who had hugged me from behind and said, "First day tomorrow, you've got this, honey." The photo had another detail that made my chest tighten. The shirt he was wearing was one I had bought him for our 3rd wedding anniversary. And if you looked closely, the background was a blue sea with leaning palm trees. It was exactly like the beach in Maui, where we had vacationed after I closed a huge project. That photo was supposed to be printed and placed on our nightstand at home. I remembered because I was the one who put it in the frame. Yet here it was, on the desk of a young woman at my new company, like a naked truth laid bare right before my eyes. I felt a ringing in my ears, a rush of hot blood to my brain that then drained down to my feet. I didn't fall, but my knees felt weak. I had been through a lot in my life, but in that moment, I understood what it felt like for the world to collapse in silence. I didn't ask right away. I sat down, took a deep breath, and typed a few meaningless words into my laptop as a defense mechanism. Then I turned, trying to keep my voice light, like a newcomer. "Chloe, who's this in the picture? He's handsome." Chloe beamed, her eyes sparkling as if I had touched upon her favorite subject. She pulled the frame closer, gently stroking the glass as if it were a precious treasure. "That's my boyfriend. We've been together for 3 years. This is my favorite picture of him, so I brought it to work for motivation. We're getting married at the end of the year." I heard the words 3 years fall like a heavy stone. 3 years. Michael and I had been married for 7 years. That meant he had been with someone else since the 4th year of our marriage. I kept smiling, the smile of a woman all too familiar with hiding her emotions behind a mask of perfect makeup. I smiled so naturally that anyone looking would have thought I was just making small talk. "So you're about to be a bride. Congratulations." "Yes, I'm so excited," Chloe said, holding her hand out in front of me. On her ring finger was a diamond ring that glittered under the office lights. It wasn't a simple band. It was the kind you knew was expensive at first glance. A large, brilliantly cut stone that reflected light like a knife's edge. He proposed last month. He said he wants to give me the wedding I deserve. We're planning to have the reception at a big hotel downtown. I'm already looking at wedding dresses. My throat felt dry. Michael had once told me he didn't like flashy things, that an engagement ring only needed to be simple because love wasn't measured in carats. Back then, I believed him. I wore the thin, plain wedding band, he said, suited our style. I used to be proud of that subtlety. Now I understood. It wasn't that he disliked extravagance. He was just saving it for someone else. I managed to keep my voice steady. What's your boyfriend's name? His name is Michael, Chloe replied as casually as if I'd asked about the weather. He works in finance. He's brilliant. He's been busy lately, working a lot of overtime, but he loves me very much. I repeated it in my head. Michael. My husband. The man who told me last night that he would be home late all week because of a big project. The man who kissed my forehead this morning before leaving the house. I heard myself ask, my voice still stable, with just the right amount of curiosity. Where did you two meet? At an industry conference. He was a speaker, and I approached him for his contact info. Chloe said this with the smile of a girl recounting a fairy tale romance. He was a bit cold at first, but I was persistent, and he eventually warmed up. He said I was the one who made him want to settle down. The phrase, settle down, sounded like a cruel joke, because I was his wife. I was the one he had already settled down with, legally bound by a marriage certificate. I blinked once, just once, to keep my eyes from turning red. I thought of all the times he'd used late meetings as an excuse, the times he'd texted that he was still at the office, the weekends he said he had an urgent meeting. I used to grumble a little but would let it go because I trusted him. I trusted him the way I trusted that my house wouldn't spontaneously catch on fire. Chloe suddenly looked at me and asked a question that made my heart feel like it was being stretched taut. Hannah, are you married? I glanced at the photo on her desk one more time. Michael's smile in the picture was identical to the one he gave me. A thing that, it turned out, could be split in two, in three, and still look as whole as the real thing. I answered without a change in my expression. Yes, I'm married. For 7 years. Chloe's eyes widened slightly. Then she let out a soft laugh, as if she had just heard a distant story. 7 years. That's a long time. The spark must be gone by now, right? I've heard people say that after 7 years, it's easy to get bored. She said it so innocently, but every word was like a thin blade slicing my skin. I wasn't angry at her. I was angry at fate for putting me in this situation. The woman in front of me knew nothing, still talking casually about 7 years, while I had to stand in the middle of an office and play my part perfectly. I nodded with a faint smile. Stability is a form of happiness, too. What's important is respect and honesty. Chloe murmured in agreement and turned back to her computer screen. I turned back to my laptop as well. The screen displayed a project plan, budget figures, and implementation items, but my mind could no longer read the words. Something inside me was running like a newly activated machine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge across the desk to snatch the photo frame or slap anyone. I just sat up straight, placed my hands on the keyboard, and felt my fingernails dig into my palms until it hurt. A single thought echoed in my head. I have to know how far this has gone. A little later, an admin assistant popped her head in. Hannah, our director, David, would like to see you in the conference room for a quick project debrief. I stood up. Okay, I'll be right there. I walked out from my desk, passing by Chloe's. She was still busy working, occasionally glancing at the photo and smiling. A smile so full of happiness it sent a chill down my spine. I walked to the elevator, looking at my reflection in the polished metal doors, a well-fitted gray pantsuit, hair in a neat bun, dark lipstick, sharp eyeliner. I looked like a successful woman embarking on a new chapter of her life. No one would know that just minutes before, my life had been torn apart by a picture frame. As the elevator doors closed, I placed a hand on my chest. My heart was still beating, but not in its usual rhythm. It was pounding out a warning. Don't be weak. Don't show it. Don't lose control. I had lived 7 years in a marriage I thought was secure. If Michael could build a second life right behind my back, then I could build something for myself too. A plan. I didn't know how far that plan would take me, but I knew one thing for sure. From this day forward, I would no longer be the naive wife who believed in the words working overtime. I would be the woman who would go to the ends of the truth and take back what was rightfully hers. And I would start right here, in this very company. The first meeting at my new job felt like a slow-motion film. I sat at the head of the table, a presentation screen filled with market data in front of me. Surrounded by the new faces of my colleagues, they talked about product promotion strategies, media budgets, and plans for the next quarter. I nodded, took notes, and occasionally made a timely professional comment, just enough to show everyone I was focused. But my mind wasn't in that room. It was replaying the image of the photograph on Chloe's desk and the words, "We've been together for 3 years." 3 years. That number was like a crack running through my 7 years of marriage, making everything that came before feel hazy. When the meeting ended, everyone left one by one. David, the director, stayed behind, looking at me with a satisfied expression. "You catch on very quickly, Hannah. I heard you came from a big firm in New York. You must have a lot of experience now that you're back in San Francisco." I smiled and nodded. "Thank you. I just hope to integrate with the team quickly." David smiled back. "The team is young, but they work quite well. Oh, by the way, the company will have a new investment consultant from a partner corporation soon. This person is quite important, so you'll probably be working with him as well." I didn't pay much attention to that comment, thinking it was just a normal part of corporate life. But I still asked politely, "When will he arrive?" "Possibly next week. I haven't met him in person yet, just heard it from the leadership." I nodded and left the conference room. As I walked down the hallway, I realized I was clutching my notebook so tightly my knuckles had turned white. I loosened my grip and took a deep breath. My mind now had only one goal: verification. Not because I wanted to cling to the faint hope that there had been a mistake. I knew I wasn't mistaken. But I needed to know how far things had gone. Back at my desk, I saw Chloe typing diligently on her computer. That photograph was still sitting peacefully in the corner, as if it had no idea it had just detonated someone else's life. I sat down, opened my laptop, but my eyes unconsciously drifted toward it again. Chloe noticed me looking and smiled. "Hannah, the team usually eats at a cafe near the office for lunch. Want to join us?" I nodded. "Sure, I'll come." While waiting for lunchtime, I tried to review project documents, but my hands opened another window: social media. I typed in Michael's name. His profile appeared immediately. The profile picture was still the one of us taken 2 years ago on a trip to Napa Valley. I stared at it for a few seconds. In the photo, I was leaning on his shoulder, my smile genuine. At that time, I believed the man beside me was my rock for life. I scrolled down. His recent posts were mostly work-related pictures of meetings, conferences, and quotes about investment and business. There was no trace of another relationship. I wasn't surprised. Michael had always been a careful person, rarely exposing his private life. But what caught my attention was a photo posted 2 months ago. He was standing on a stage at a finance conference, with hundreds of people in the audience below. Beneath the photo was a comment from an admirer. The account belonged to Chloe. I stared at that picture for a long time. In it, Michael wore a black suit, the stage lights illuminating his confident face. I remembered that day. He had told me he had to fly to Chicago for a meeting with a partner. I had even reminded him to take care of himself because of his busy schedule. It turned out he was right here, in this city, standing before a crowd with that other woman looking up at him with admiration. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't jealousy, but a cold clarity. I began to understand that this relationship wasn't a momentary impulse. It was built step by step, with planning and concealment. Just then, my phone vibrated. A text from Michael. "Is your first day going okay, honey?" I looked at the words for a few seconds. If it had been this morning, I might have replied immediately with a smiling emoji. But now, those words felt like part of a play. I typed a short line. "It's fine. The company is pretty good." He replied instantly. "Good," I was worried. "I'll be home a bit late tonight. Have a meeting with a partner." I stared at the screen. Meeting with a partner. Those 3 words suddenly felt heavy. I slowly typed back. Okay, you focus on work. That was it. No more questions, no nagging. I put my phone down. At noon, the whole team went out for lunch. The cafe was in a small alley, a few minutes' walk from the company. It had a simple atmosphere, with wooden tables and chairs, and the rich aroma of food. Everyone ate and chatted cheerfully. I joined the conversation, but my attention remained on Chloe. She told stories naturally, laughed a lot, and sometimes mentioned Michael with a voice full of pride. He's so busy, always running projects in finance, but he still makes time for me, a colleague teased. You're lucky to have such a successful future husband. Chloe blushed. He said we'll buy our own place after we get married at the end of the year. He's looking at some luxury condos in the Soma neighborhood. I was holding my chopsticks, but my hand froze for a second. Soma. Michael had also told me he was considering investing in a condo there. At the time, he said it was for rental income, or as an asset. I had believed him. Chloe continued, her eyes lighting up. He says a man has to be able to provide for his family. Hearing that makes me feel so secure. I swallowed a mouthful of food. It felt dry in my throat. I looked at the girl across from me. She had no idea she was caught in a complex story. To her, that man was a perfect lover. After lunch, everyone returned to the company. As I walked into the office, I saw that picture on the desk again. This time, I didn't feel shocked. Instead, I felt something else. Determination. I opened my laptop and truly began to work. While everyone thought I was reading project documents, I was secretly opening a separate spreadsheet. I recorded the information I had just learned: her name, how long they'd been together, the conference, the plan to buy a house, Soma. Each detail was like a piece of a puzzle. The afternoon passed quickly. When it was time to leave, I packed up my things. See you all tomorrow. Chloe stood up too. Hannah, which way are you heading? I take the bus. I'm taking an Uber. Okay, see you tomorrow then. I nodded. As I stepped out of the building, the sun was setting. The city was crowded, traffic was dense, and the lights were beginning to turn on. I stood by the curb, waiting for my ride. While I waited, my phone rang again. It was Michael. I answered. Hey, I'm on my way to meet the partner now. You go ahead and have dinner. I looked at the stream of cars in front of me, my voice calm. Okay. He laughed softly. You must be tired after your first day. Get some rest. Okay. The call ended. I stood still for a moment. A very clear thought emerged in my mind. If he could build a second life behind my back for 3 years, the truth certainly didn't stop at what I saw today. I got into the Uber. As the car started moving, I opened my phone's contact list and found a name. Sarah, lawyer. I didn't press call. I just looked at the name for a few seconds, then turned off the screen. I knew I didn't need to act rashly, but I also knew that from today, I would start collecting everything. Evidence, timelines, money, everything. Because if this marriage had been betrayed, I would not be leaving empty-handed. My story had only just begun. The Uber stopped in front of my apartment building as dusk settled completely. The warm lights of the luxury complex cast a glow on the stone walkway, looking so peaceful that any outsider would think this was a place for happy families. I got out, paid the driver, and walked slowly into the lobby. The doorman, who knew me, smiled and greeted me. Hi, Miss Hannah. Home early today. I nodded. Yeah. First day at the new job, so I'm a bit tired. The elevator doors closed, taking me up to the 16th floor. When the door to our apartment swung open, the familiar scent of home made my heart sink. Everything was the same. The gray sofa I had chosen, the oak coffee table Michael liked, and the landscape painting in the living room that we bought on a trip to Lake Tahoe years ago. A home built on 7 years of life together. Every object held a memory. But now, as I looked around, I no longer felt the warmth. I only saw question marks. I put my bag down on the table, took off my shoes, and went straight to the kitchen. Out of habit, I opened the refrigerator to see what I could make for dinner. But then, I paused. Michael had said, "I'll be home late tonight, meeting with a partner." I let out a small, bitter laugh. The word partner had suddenly become something very vague. I closed the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of water, and sat on the sofa. My phone was in my hand. Part of me wanted to reopen Chloe's social media page. Another part wanted to check my husband's phone for more clues. But I didn't act immediately. I understood one thing clearly. If I acted on emotion, I would make mistakes. I needed to be calm. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "I'm done with work, but probably won't be home until after 10. I looked at the message for a few seconds, then stood up and went into the bedroom. The drawer on the right side of the bed was where Michael usually kept some personal papers. I pulled it open. Inside were his passport, a few old contracts, and a small notebook. I opened the notebook. It contained only a few work notes and appointment schedules. Nothing special. I put it down and looked at his closet. His shirts were hung neatly in a row. I walked closer, running my hand over each one. Suddenly, I stopped at a dark blue V-neck shirt. I remembered this shirt. Michael had worn it to a finance conference, the very picture I saw on social media earlier. I took the shirt down and checked the pockets. Inside was a restaurant receipt, a high-end Japanese restaurant in the financial district. The date on the receipt was from 3 weeks ago. The total nearly $300. I stared at the receipt as a memory surfaced. 3 weeks ago, on that night, Michael told me he had to have dinner with a client. I even asked if I should wait up for him. He said no, because the meeting might go late. I sat on the edge of the bed, the receipt still in my hand. 3 years. 3 years is not a short time. That meant for the past 3 years, many evenings like this had taken place. I opened my phone and searched for Chloe's account again. This time, I scrolled more carefully through her travel photos, food pictures, and cheerful status updates. Most of them didn't mention Michael directly, but occasionally, in a few photos, I recognized familiar details. A man's watch placed on a coffee table. The same watch I had bought for Michael on his birthday. A picture of a wine glass with 2 glasses facing each other. I looked closely at the corner of the photo. There was a man's hand on the table. The ring on that hand was our wedding band. I put the phone down and exhaled slowly. There was no doubt anymore. Michael wasn't just having an affair. He was living 2 parallel lives. Around 10:30 p.m., I heard the door open. Michael walked in, just like any other day. I shook my head. "Waiting for you." He smiled, walked over, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "How was your first day?" I looked him straight in the eye. It was fine. He nodded and went to the kitchen for some water. I watched his every move. The way he opened the fridge, the way he drank, the way he walked into the bedroom. It was all familiar. But now I saw it all with different eyes. When he returned to the living room, I asked a very normal question. "Which partner did you meet with today?" Michael answered without hesitation. "A group of investors from Singapore. They're looking to partner on a financial project." He spoke fluently, as if the story were completely true. I nodded without asking further. If it had been before, I would have believed him. But now I understood that Michael was used to lying. He sat down next to me, placing his hand on my shoulder out of habit. "If you're tired, you should go to bed." I looked at him for a few seconds. In my mind, an image of Chloe flashed, smiling radiantly as she talked about her man. 2 women, one who believed she was the wife, one who believed she was the future wife, while the man sitting in front of me lived comfortably between their 2 beliefs. I stood up. "I'm going to bed first." I walked into the bedroom and closed the door. As I lay down, I heard the sound of Michael showering in the bathroom, the water running steadily. I stared at the ceiling, my mind wide awake. I knew I had 2 choices. 1, explode right now, confront him, and turn this house into a battlefield. 2, stay silent, gather everything, and make a decision when everything was clear. I chose the second option. About half an hour later, Michael got into bed. He lay down beside me, turned off the light, and wrapped his arm around me as he did every night. Go to sleep, honey. I closed my eyes, but in the darkness, I wasn't sleeping. I was silently thinking about my plan. Tomorrow, I would start with the smallest things: his work schedule, the cash flow in our joint account, and the meetings he called with partners. Because if Michael could hide 3 years, I could be patient enough to see the whole truth. And when the truth was revealed, I would be the one to decide how this story ends. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky outside the window was still misty, the sunlight just beginning to filter through the distant buildings. Michael was still asleep beside me, his breathing even, his arm still resting lightly on my waist as it did every morning. Anyone looking at this moment would surely think this was a peaceful family, but I knew that behind that peaceful facade was a truth slowly being uncovered. I gently removed his arm, got out of bed, and went to the bathroom. My reflection in the mirror was calm, but my eyes seemed sharper than usual. I washed my face for a long time, as if trying to fully awaken my senses. When I came out of the bathroom, Michael was awake. He was sitting up in bed, his hair messy, and he smiled at me. "You're up early, honey." I nodded. "I have to get to the office a little early today." He got up, walked over, and kissed my forehead lightly, a morning habit. "Was your first day yesterday okay?" "Fine." He smiled and walked toward the closet. I stood and watched him choose a shirt. Every movement he made now caught my attention, not out of love, but because I was learning to observe. Michael chose a white shirt and turned to me. "I have a meeting with a client today, so I'll probably be home late again." I nodded. "Okay." He didn't notice any change in me. Perhaps because for the past 3 years, he had grown accustomed to my absolute trust. We had breakfast together like any other day. Michael ate while reading the news on his phone. I noticed him smiling occasionally as he looked at the screen. I asked softly, "What's so amusing?" He looked up. "Oh, just some articles about the market." I nodded, but as soon as he got up to go change, I quickly glanced at his phone on the table. The screen had just lit up with a new message. The sender's name appeared, Chloe. The message was just one short line: "Let's meet tonight." I stared at the words for a few seconds, then placed the phone back in its exact spot. My heart wasn't racing like yesterday. Instead, there was a cold feeling. Michael returned to the table and picked up his phone without knowing I had seen anything. He put it in his pocket, smiled at me, and said, "I'm heading out." I nodded. "Okay." The door closed behind him. I stood in the living room for a few minutes. Everything around me was the same, but in my head, the details were connecting. The text from Chloe, the lie about the meeting tonight, the evening's meeting with partners. I picked up my own phone and reread Michael's text from last night. "I'll be home a bit late tonight. Have a meeting with a partner." I exhaled slowly. A lie repeated so many times it had become a habit. About half an hour later, I also left for work. On the way to the office, my mind was still racing. I had no more doubts, but I needed more evidence, not to convince myself, but to prepare for the next step. When I arrived at the office, Chloe was already there. She was organizing documents on her desk, looking very happy. When she saw me walk in, she smiled brightly. "Good morning, Hannah." "Morning." I put my bag down and turned on my laptop. A moment later, Chloe turned to me. "Hannah, my boyfriend and I went to that new Japanese restaurant in the financial district last night. It was amazing." I looked up at her. "Oh, really?" "Yeah. He said it had been a while since we had a nice dinner out, so he wanted to take me." I smiled faintly. "That sounds romantic." Chloe smiled shyly. "He's always like that." I turned back to my computer screen. In my mind, I remembered the receipt from the Japanese restaurant I found last night. That might be where they often met. The morning passed with meetings and emails, but amidst the work, I was silently observing. Every time Chloe's phone buzzed, she would look at the screen and smile. Around noon, she stood up and said to me, "Hannah, I'm going downstairs for coffee. Do you want anything?" "An iced black coffee, please." "Okay." When Chloe left her desk, I glanced at her phone on the table. I didn't touch it, but the screen lit up with a message. The sender was Michael. I only caught a part of the message on the screen. "I'm busy this afternoon. I'll pick you up tonight." I quickly turned back to my computer screen when I heard footsteps returning. Chloe placed the coffee on my desk. "Here's your coffee." "Thanks." She sat down and checked her phone. I saw the smile on her lips grow even brighter. An indescribable feeling washed over me. Not jealousy, not the pain of yesterday, but a certainty. Michael was living two lives. That afternoon, when it was time to leave, I deliberately left the office a little later. I stood at the entrance of the building, pretending to look at my phone. About 10 minutes later, I saw Chloe come out. She stood on the sidewalk, looking around as if waiting for someone. A black sedan pulled up in front of her. The door opened, and the person who got out was Michael. He was wearing a white shirt, holding the car keys, with that familiar smile on his face. Chloe ran up and hugged him. I was standing a few dozen feet away, but I could still see every movement clearly. Michael leaned down and said something, then opened the car door for her. They both got in and drove away. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time. In that moment, all my suspicions vanished. The truth was right in front of me. My husband and the girl who sat next to me every day at the office were in love, and they had no idea that I had seen everything. I turned and walked toward the parking garage, with only one thought in my mind. This game had just begun, and this time, I would no longer be a bystander. That night, I didn't go straight home. After seeing Michael pick up Chloe in front of the office, I drove directly to the Embarcadero, overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The city at night was still noisy, but this stretch of the waterfront had a strange quietness. I turned off the engine and sat in silence for a long time, the city lights reflecting on the water like shattered pieces of glass. My mind was the same. Pieces of the truth were slowly fitting together. For 3 years, Michael had lived another life right behind my back. My phone vibrated. A text from Michael. "I'm having dinner with a client. Will probably be late." I looked at the words for a few seconds and then tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I was beginning to understand that texts like this were just part of a script he had been performing for far too long. I started the car, left the waterfront, and drove to a small, familiar coffee shop in Hayes Valley. It was where I always met my best friend whenever I needed to talk, the only person I trusted to listen without judgment. When I walked in, Sarah was already sitting at our usual corner table. Sarah was my friend from college, now a lawyer specializing in asset disputes. She looked at me with some surprise. "Hannah, you called so suddenly. What's wrong?" I sat down across from her. A waiter brought my coffee. I looked at the steaming cup and said slowly, "Sarah, I think Michael is having an affair." Sarah was silent for a few seconds. She didn't look as shocked as I expected, just furrowed her brow slightly. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "Not just an affair, but a long-term relationship." Sarah placed her hands on the table. "Tell me everything." I started from the beginning. My first day at the new company, the photo on Chloe's desk, the engagement ring, the texts on his phone, and the moment I stood in front of the office that afternoon watching Michael pick her up. Sarah listened intently, not interrupting once. When I finished, she let out a soft sigh. 3 years. I nodded. "At least." Sarah looked at me. "What are you going to do?" I was silent for a few seconds. "I don't know yet. But I know one thing. If this ends, I'm not going to lose everything." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "You mean the assets?" "Yes." I looked at my coffee. "This condo, our savings, the investments, we built it all together. If he used our joint money to fund another life, I need to know." Sarah nodded slowly. "You're right." She opened her handbag and took out a small notebook. "In cases like this, the most important thing is evidence." I looked at her. "Evidence?" "Yes," Sarah said calmly. "If you only have suspicions or words, things get very difficult in a legal setting. But if you have clear evidence of infidelity or the use of joint assets for a third party, you'll have the advantage." I nodded. "I understand," Sarah continued. "You need to track 3 things: finances, time, and the relationship. I furrowed my brow. You mean, finances see if he's transferring money to her, time those nights he calls client meetings, and the relationship proof that they are living like a couple. I sat quietly for a few seconds. What Sarah said was exactly what had been running through my mind yesterday. I'm already doing that. Sarah looked at me. You're calmer than I thought you'd be. I gave a small smile. Maybe because the biggest shock is already over. Sarah took a sip of her coffee and then asked, Does this girl know you're his wife? I shook my head. No. Sarah sighed. Then she might be a victim too. I think so too. I remembered Chloe's smile when she talked about her future husband. A smile of complete trust. Sarah put her notebook on the table. Then you have to be even more careful. Why? If Michael finds out you're investigating, he could cover his tracks. I nodded. I understand. Sarah looked at me for a long time. Hannah, yeah? Are you really okay? I didn't answer right away. I looked out the glass window. The city was still bright with lights. People were passing by, and life out there continued as normal. Not really, I said quietly, but I will be. Sarah nodded. Good. She closed her notebook. If you need any legal help, just let me know. Thanks. We sat for a little while longer, and then I left the coffee shop. By the time I got home, it was almost 11 p.m. Michael still wasn't back. I walked into the living room and turned on the light. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock. I went into the bedroom and opened my laptop. A new spreadsheet appeared. I started recording everything I knew. Dates, locations, text messages, those evenings with partners. Each detail was like a piece of a puzzle that I was slowly seeing more clearly. About half an hour later, the front door opened. Michael walked in, looking a bit tired. You're not asleep yet? I looked up from my laptop. Not yet. He put his briefcase on the table. Today's meeting with the client went on for too long. I nodded. I see. He went into the bathroom. I watched his retreating figure. Sarah's words echoed in my head. Evidence, finances, time, relationship. This fight was no longer about emotions. It had become a chess game, and I would not make any hasty moves, because when the truth was fully revealed, the loser would not be me. The next morning, I woke up to find Michael already gone. Next to me was an empty pillow and a small note on the nightstand in his familiar handwriting. Had to leave early for a client meeting. Eat breakfast and take care. Before, I might have smiled at that small gesture of care. But now, looking at the note, I only felt a cold emptiness. The words of concern were still there, but their meaning had changed. I got out of bed, made a cup of coffee, and sat at the desk in the living room. My laptop was open, the spreadsheet from last night still on the screen. The lines of notes about times, places, and Michael's lies were slowly forming a system. But as Sarah had said, one of the most important things was still missing. The money trail. I opened my banking app. Our joint account was still used for family living expenses. Michael was the primary manager because he worked in finance. I had never suspected anything before, so I rarely checked the details. Today was the first time I looked at each transaction carefully. A long list appeared on the screen. Electricity bills, water bills, groceries, condo management fees, all normal. I scrolled further down, to the transactions from the last 3 months. Then, I saw a transfer of $15,000. The recipient, C. Miller. I paused. I read the line again to make sure I wasn't mistaken. Chloe Miller. The transfer was made at the end of last month. I scrolled down. Another transfer, $10,000, also to C. Miller. This one was from 2 months ago. An icy chill ran down my spine. I kept scrolling. 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. The transfers repeated several times. Sometimes $5,000, sometimes $8,000, sometimes larger amounts. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. Michael wasn't just cheating. He was using our joint money to support another woman. I opened my spreadsheet and started recording each transaction. Date, amount, description. Each number was like a small needle piercing the truth that I was trying to face with composure. After nearly an hour, I had compiled all the transactions from the past year. The total amount transferred to C. Miller was over. 800, Ohaltres, null. I sat silently in front of the screen. $150,000. That wasn't a small sum, and it certainly wasn't just Michael's money. Most of the money in our joint account was our combined savings over many years. My phone vibrated. A text from Sarah. "You okay?" I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then replied, "I just discovered something." "What?" "Our joint account has transferred over $150,000 to that girl." Sarah called immediately. "Hannah, are you serious?" "Yes," I heard Sarah sigh on the other end. "Then this isn't just a personal matter anymore." "You mean, if that money is a joint asset, his transferring it to a third party can become a serious legal issue." I looked back at the spreadsheet. "I've saved all the transactions." "Good," Sarah said immediately. "You need to back everything up. Take screenshots, save the files, send them to a private email." "Okay, and absolutely do not let him know you've found out." "I understand." The call ended. I started doing exactly as Sarah had instructed, screenshotting every transaction, saving them in a private folder, and emailing them to myself. By the time I finished, it was almost noon. I was getting ready to leave for work when my phone rang again. It was Michael. I answered. "Hey, I forgot to ask, will you be home late today?" "Why?" "I have a meeting with a partner tonight." I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop, where the numbers were as clear as an indictment. "Okay," I said calmly. "I might be late too." He chuckled lightly. "Looks like we're both having a late dinner again." I didn't reply. After hanging up, I closed my laptop and left the house. When I got to the office, Chloe was at her desk, looking very happy. She saw me and said, "Hannah, I went to dinner with Michael at that new restaurant last night. It was beautiful." I put my bag down. "Oh, really?" "Yeah. He said we might be able to look at that condo in Soma soon." I looked at her for a few seconds. "A condo." Chloe nodded, her eyes shining. "He said a man has to prepare a home before getting married." I turned back to my computer screen. In my mind, I suddenly remembered a large transaction in the account. A down payment transfer to a real estate company. $25,000. The transfer date was just last week. That afternoon, while everyone in the office was busy, I quietly opened the spreadsheet again. The numbers on the screen no longer made me tremble. They made me clear-headed. Michael thought he was in control of everything, but in reality, every transaction he made left a trail, and that trail was slowly becoming the most powerful weapon in my hands. I clicked save. A thought slowly formed in my mind. If Michael wanted to build a new life with our money, I would be the one to make him pay for every single dollar. After discovering the money transfers, my mind became strangely clear. Every detail of Michael's daily life now seemed like a puzzle piece that could lead me to a bigger truth. The morning at the office passed normally, but I was no longer normal on the inside. Chloe came to work later than usual. When she walked in, she was carrying a large shopping bag from a luxury fashion brand. As soon as she sat down, she opened the bag and took out a shoebox. "Hannah," she turned to me, her voice cheerful. "Look, aren't these beautiful?" I glanced over. A pair of beige high heels, elegantly designed, clearly not cheap. "They're lovely." Chloe beamed. "Michael bought them for me last night." I nodded. "Your boyfriend really spoils you," she giggled. "He says a girl needs to be taken care of." I turned back to my computer screen. My mind flashed to a charge on our joint credit card from last night. $800. A high-end fashion boutique at the mall. I exhaled slowly. Every small detail was fitting together perfectly, chillingly. That afternoon, the team went out for lunch again. Chloe sat next to me, chatting as she ate. "Hannah, we went to see a condo in Soma yesterday." I looked up. "Oh?" "Yes." She nodded, her eyes sparkling. "The unit was beautiful. It has a view of the bay." A colleague asked curiously, How much is it? Chloe seemed a bit shy. Around 2.5 million. Everyone's eyes widened. Your boyfriend is that rich? Chloe smiled. Well, he works in investment finance. I picked up my glass of water and took a sip. $2.5 million. I remembered the $25,000 down payment I saw in the account. It meant Michael was truly serious about this plan. A new condo, a new life, a new family. That evening after work, I decided to do something I never thought I would. I followed them. I left the office a few minutes early and sat in a coffee shop across the street from the building. From there, I could see the company's entrance. About 15 minutes later, Chloe walked out. She stood waiting, as usual. A few minutes later, Michael's familiar car appeared. I saw him get out, that smile on his face that I once thought was only for me. Chloe ran up and hugged him. He leaned down and said something that made her laugh. I sat in the coffee shop, my hand gripping my cold drink. They got in the car and left. I stood up, paid, and went to the parking garage. I kept a safe distance, but was close enough to see Michael's car ahead. The car drove over the Bay Bridge, and my heart beat a little faster. Soon, the car stopped in front of a luxury high-rise condo complex under construction near the water. I parked across the street and got out. From a distance, I saw Michael and Chloe standing in front of a project model with a sales agent. Chloe looked at the model with a dreamy expression. Michael stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. The sales agent said something and pointed to a tower in the model. Michael nodded. Chloe held his hand, her face radiant like a girl seeing her future. I stood about 100 feet away from them. Not far, but far enough that they wouldn't notice me. I watched the scene for a few minutes. An image of the condo Michael and I lived in flashed in my mind. 7 years ago, we had chosen every piece of furniture, every paint color together. Michael had once told me that house would be where we grew old together. And now, he was standing in front of another home with another woman. I didn't go any closer. I just took out my phone and took a few pictures from a distance. Not because I wanted to preserve this heartbreaking moment, but because I needed proof. After about 20 minutes, Michael and Chloe left the sales gallery. They got in the car and drove away. I stood still for another moment before returning to my car. On the way back, the city began to light up. The skyscrapers glowed like giant glass blocks. In my mind, a thought became clearer and clearer. Michael thought he was building a new future, but he didn't know that his every step was leaving a trail, and I was right behind him, picking up every single clue. When I got home, Michael wasn't back yet. I opened my laptop and uploaded the photos I had just taken. In the pictures, Michael and Chloe stood side by side in front of the condo model, looking exactly like a couple about to buy a home. I saved the file in a password-protected folder. Then, I opened the spreadsheet and added a new line. Date. Location. Soma Condo Sales Gallery. I stared at the screen for a long time. My marriage might have been broken for 3 years, but the real fight had just begun. That night, I went to bed very late, not because of the heartbreak like in the first few days of discovering the truth, but because my mind was working non-stop. The facts I had gathered over the past few days were beginning to form a clear picture. The messages, the receipts, the money trail, the meetings, the condo in Soma, it all led to the same conclusion. Michael had been preparing for a new life for a long time, and that life did not include me. The next morning, when I woke up, Michael was still home. He was in the kitchen making coffee, looking completely calm. When he saw me, he smiled. "You're up." I nodded. "Yeah." He placed a cup of coffee in front of me. "I made you one." I looked at the coffee, then at him. The image from last night flashed in my mind. Him standing next to Chloe in front of the condo model, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. A very familiar gesture. A gesture he used to give me when we were newlyweds. I sat down. "You're not leaving early today?" Michael shook his head. "My meeting is later today." He sat down across from me, opening his phone to read the news. The kitchen was quiet, only the sound of a spoon clinking against a cup. After a moment, he looked up. "You seem so busy lately." I looked at him. "It's a new company, So there's a lot to do. He nodded. Me too. We talked like two perfectly normal people, with no arguments, no suspicion. But I knew there was a gap between us that he hadn't yet realized. After breakfast, Michael left first. I stayed for a few more minutes, then got ready for work. Before leaving the apartment, I opened my laptop to check the folder of documents I had saved. The photos from Soma, the spreadsheet of money transfers, the screenshots of text messages. I looked at it all for a few seconds, then closed the laptop. Today, I planned to do something important. When I arrived at the office, Chloe was already there. She was on the phone, her voice cheerful. Yes, let's go to dinner tonight. I miss you too. I put my bag down, pretending not to notice. But in my heart, I knew who was on the other end of the line. When Chloe hung up, she turned to me. Hannah, are you busy today? Why? I was hoping you could look over a marketing proposal for Michael's project. I froze for a second. Your boyfriend's project? Yes, she nodded. He's preparing to invest in a new fintech project. He said good marketing would make it easier to raise capital. I looked at her for a few seconds. Okay, send it over. Chloe opened her laptop and sent me the file. I opened the document. On the very first page was the logo of a newly established investment firm. The company name, Stonebridge Capital. I frowned. The name was too familiar. I scrolled down to the project's legal information section. Legal representative, Michael Cole. I sat still for a few seconds. What caught my attention wasn't that he had started a new company, but the list of shareholders. A name appeared right below his, Chloe Miller. Shareholding percentage, 20%. I looked up at the girl sitting across from me. She was still smiling, completely unaware of what I had just read. What do you think? I closed the file. The marketing ideas aren't bad. Chloe smiled happily. I knew it. Michael said if this project succeeds, we'll have a very solid financial foundation. I nodded. He trusts you that much? Yes. She nodded proudly. He said I'm the person he trusts the most. A bitter feeling washed over me. The person he trusted the most. I wondered how many times Michael had said that to me over the past 7 years. That afternoon, I asked to leave work early, not because I was tired, but because I needed to confirm one more thing. I drove to an office building in the financial district. This was the registered business address of the new company I had just seen in the document. After asking the receptionist, I went up to the 8th floor. A small office with a sign that read, Stonebridge Capital, was attached to the door. I stood in front of the door for a few seconds. I could hear people talking inside. I peeked through the frosted glass. Michael was sitting in a meeting room. Next to him was Chloe. They were talking to another investor, a business plan spread out on the table. That scene made me understand something crucial. Michael wasn't just having an affair. He was building a new company with Chloe, a new future, a new life, and all of it might have been built with my money. I turned and left the building. In my mind, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This fight was no longer just about the marriage. It was about money, assets, and years of betrayal. And now, I had enough reason to take the next step. That evening, when I returned to the apartment, the city had long been lit up. The wind from the bay blew through the balcony, making the curtains sway gently. I stood in the living room for a long time before turning on the lights. The familiar home suddenly felt foreign. Every object, every corner, reminded me of the years I had believed this marriage was my final destination. But now that the truth had been revealed, I understood that some things that seem permanent are just shells built with clever lies. I opened my laptop and reviewed all the documents I had collected over the past few days. The money transfers to Chloe, the photos from Soma, the information about Stonebridge Capital, the shareholder list with Chloe's name. It was all neatly organized in a password-protected folder. I called Sarah. She picked up almost immediately. Anything new? I spoke slowly. Michael started a new company. Sarah was silent for a few seconds. What kind of company? An investment firm, Stonebridge Capital. Who are the shareholders? Him and Chloe. I could hear Sarah exhale on the other end. So he's not just cheating, he's preparing a separate economic life. Yes. I looked at my laptop screen, and I suspect the initial capital might have come from our joint funds, Sarah said immediately. If that's true, this is a very serious matter. I think so too. Sarah paused for a moment, then asked, "What's your next move?" I looked out at the balcony. The city below was a sea of lights. "I want to confirm exactly where that money went," Sarah nodded, though I couldn't see her. "You have to be careful." "I know. It's best to back up all the financial data from the joint account before he finds out." "I already did." Sarah laughed softly. "You're faster than I thought." I managed a small smile. Probably because I don't have any other choice. The call ended. Around 1:00 p.m., the front door opened. Michael walked in, looking quite relaxed. He took off his coat, hung it up, and saw me sitting in the living room. "You're not asleep yet?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He walked over and sat down in the chair across from me. "I've been busy all day." I looked at him for a few seconds. "Is your new project going well?" Michael froze, just for a second, but I noticed. "What project are you talking about?" "The finance one," I replied calmly. "You said you were preparing an investment." He nodded. "Oh, that. It's going okay." He looked at me. "Why do you ask?" I shrugged. "Just curious." Michael smiled faintly, but his eyes seemed to be studying me. "Since when are you interested in investing?" "My husband is in the industry," I said. "It's normal for me to ask." He nodded, then stood up and went to the kitchen for water. I watched his back. Michael didn't know that just a few hours ago, I was standing in front of his new company's office. He didn't know I had seen Chloe's name on the shareholder list, and he certainly didn't know that I had recorded every single dollar he had transferred. When he returned to the living room, I had already closed my laptop. He sat down next to me. "You've been working too hard lately." I looked at him. "You too." Michael smiled. "Yeah, this phase is a bit hectic." I nodded. A strange feeling washed over me. It was no longer pain or anger, but a cold calm. I stood up. "I'm going to bed first." "Okay," he replied. I walked into the bedroom and closed the door. As I lay down, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. What I knew now was enough to understand the whole story. Michael was cheating. He was using our joint money to support Chloe. He started a company with her and was planning to buy a separate condo. A new life was being built, step by step. The only thing was, he thought I still knew nothing. The next morning when I arrived at the office, Chloe was sitting in front of her computer, looking very happy. "Hannah," she called out to me. "Michael told me yesterday that their project is about to get an investor." I put my bag down. "Oh, really?" "Yes." She smiled radiantly. "If it's successful, we can expand the company." I nodded. "Congratulations." Chloe looked at me. "You're always so calm." I smiled faintly. "I've been in marketing for a long time, so I'm used to it." She smiled and went back to her work. I opened my laptop, but my eyes drifted to the picture frame on her desk. In it, Michael was smiling. The same smile he had when he looked at me in the early years of our marriage. I suddenly realized something. Chloe might not be the one who broke my family. She was just living in the story Michael had told her, a story in which he might have said he was single, or separated, or about to be divorced. But that didn't change the truth. The truth was that he had betrayed me, and I would not let this story end the way he wanted. I opened my spreadsheet and added a new line to the evidence list. Date. Location, Stonebridge Capital Office. Shareholders, Michael Cole and Chloe Miller. I clicked save. The first move was complete. Now, I just had to wait for the right moment to make the next one. In the following days, I lived as if nothing had changed. I went to work in the morning, came home in the evening, had dinner with Michael, and talked about very ordinary things. Anyone looking at our life then would have seen a stable couple, no arguments, no tension, sometimes even the same caring words as before, but only I knew that behind that normality, a plan was slowly taking shape. At the office, I still sat next to Chloe every day. She became more and more open with me, perhaps thinking I was an easy person to confide in. Whenever something good happened with her boyfriend, she would often tell me first. One afternoon, during the lunch break, Chloe pulled her chair closer to mine. "Hannah, yes? Can I ask you something?" I looked at her. "What is it?" She hesitated a bit. "Do you think if a man is really serious, how long would he wait to get married?" I didn't answer right away. "Why do you ask?" Chloe looked down at her hands, her voice a little shy. "Michael and I have been together for 3 years. He said we'll get married after his new project is stable." I looked at the girl in front of me. 3 years, the same amount of time I had discovered their relationship had been going on. "Do you trust him?" I asked. Chloe nodded with absolute certainty. "Of course. He's never let me down." I nodded slightly. "That's good then." She smiled. "He even said that once the new company is stable, we'll move into the condo in Soma. Do you think that area is nice?" I remembered the afternoon I stood 100 feet away from them at the project sales gallery. "It's beautiful," I said. "The view of the bay is great." Chloe was happy. "I like it too." She paused for a moment, then added, "Michael says a man has to have a house before he gets a wife." I smiled faintly. He's right, but in my mind, I thought of something else. Chloe had no idea she was the third person. She was living in a story Michael had created just for her, a story in which he was a single man or someone preparing for a divorce. That afternoon after work, Chloe was waiting in front of the building as usual. I walked past her. "Is your boyfriend coming soon?" "Yes, probably in a few minutes," she smiled. "He rarely keeps me waiting long." I nodded and walked toward the parking garage. But instead of leaving right away, I sat in my car for a while. A few minutes later, Michael's car appeared. He got out, opened the door for Chloe, and they both got in. That scene had become familiar to me. But this time, I didn't follow them. I just sat in my car, watching their car leave the parking lot. A thought slowly formed in my mind. Michael was living in 2 worlds, one world as a caring husband in our apartment, the other world as a successful man preparing to marry a new wife and build a new company. The problem was, those 2 worlds were about to collide. That evening, when I got home, Michael was already there. He was sitting in the living room watching TV. "You're home." "Yeah." I put my bag on a chair. He looked at me for a moment, and then asked, "You seem tired lately." "Just work," I replied. He stood up, went to the kitchen for water, and came back. "Let's go out for dinner this weekend." I looked at him. "Why?" He smiled. "It's been a while since we went out. Just the 2 of us." I nodded. "Okay." Michael didn't know that his words reminded me of what Chloe had told me. The evenings he said he was meeting with partners, the dinners at the Japanese restaurant, the expensive gifts. I sat on the chair across from him. A new idea suddenly came to me. If Michael could live 2 lives at once, maybe it was time for those 2 lives to meet. That night, lying in bed, I thought for a long time. Not about divorce, not about arguing, but about how to let the truth reveal itself. The next morning, when I arrived at the office, Chloe was looking at her phone with a very happy expression. "Hannah." "Yes?" "Next week, Michael's company is hosting an investor reception. He said I should come with him." I looked at her. "Oh, really?" "Yes," she smiled. "He wants to introduce me to everyone." I nodded. "Congratulations." Chloe happily went back to her work, while I opened my laptop. It occurred to me that perhaps that reception would be the perfect time for everything to change. An investor reception, a new company, a man trying to build a second life, and a wife he believed still knew nothing. I quietly clicked the save button on my document. The game was halfway through, and the next move would change everything. After hearing Chloe talk about the investor reception for Stonebridge Capital, my mind immediately started calculating. An event like that would surely have many attendees, partners, investors, industry friends. More importantly, It was where Michael wanted to publicly present himself as the founder of a new company. And if Chloe was invited to go with him, he likely saw her as part of his future. The morning at the office was quiet, but I was not quiet inside. I opened my laptop and reviewed the documents I had collected, the photos from Soma, the money transfers, the company's shareholder information. It was all like a map leading me to the moment I had been waiting for. Around 10 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "I have a meeting at noon, so you go ahead and have lunch." I looked at the message for a few seconds. "Okay," I replied briefly. Before, whenever I got messages like this, I used to think he was really busy. But now I understood that many of those meetings were actually just rendezvous with Chloe. At noon, as everyone in the office was getting ready for lunch, Chloe turned to me. "Hannah, yes? I bet the investor reception next week will be a lot of fun." I asked, "Where is it?" "At the Riverside Hotel downtown," she said with excitement. "Michael said a lot of important people from the industry will be there." I nodded. "It sounds important." Chloe smiled. "He said it's the first step for the company to raise capital." I looked at her for a few seconds. "He must really trust you." She nodded. "Michael said I'm the one who's been with him from the beginning." I smiled faintly. In my heart, I thought that Michael might truly trust her, but that didn't mean he hadn't betrayed me. That afternoon, I worked with intense focus, not because the workload was heavier, but because I was preparing a new move. Around 4 p.m., I called Sarah. She answered, "What's up?" "I think it's time." "Time for what?" "For everything to be seen." Sarah was silent for a few seconds. "What are you planning to do?" "I want to go to that investor reception," Sarah said immediately. "In what capacity?" "As Michael's wife." On the other end of the line, Sarah let out a small laugh. "Not a bad idea." "I think so too." Sarah thought for a moment, then said, "If you show up there, everything will change instantly." "I know. Are you ready?" I looked out the office window. The tall buildings outside stood silently under the afternoon sun. "I've been ready since I found out the truth," Sarah said. "Then you need to prepare carefully." "I will." The call ended. That evening when I got home, Michael was in the living room with his laptop open on the table. He seemed to be working. When he saw me walk in, he looked up. "You're home?" "Yeah." I put my bag on the chair. "Are you busy?" "Yeah," he said. "Preparing for the investor reception next week." I walked closer. "It's at the Riverside Hotel, right?" Michael froze for a second. "You know, a friend mentioned it," I replied. He nodded. "Yeah, it's just a small gathering." I sat down on the chair across from him. "Are you inviting a lot of people?" "Just a few investors and partners," he said. "It's not a big event." I nodded. In my mind, I thought that he certainly never considered the possibility of me showing up there. Michael closed his laptop. "Are you busy this weekend?" "Why?" "Let's go out for dinner." I looked at him for a few seconds. "Okay." He smiled. "I want us to have some time for ourselves." I nodded. In my heart, I remembered the times he had said that to Chloe. After dinner, I went to the bedroom earlier than usual, but I didn't sleep right away. I opened my phone and looked up the address of the Riverside Hotel again. The investor reception would be next Friday night. Only a few days left. I stared at my phone screen for a long time. Maybe when that moment came, everything would change completely. My marriage, Michael's life, and the world Chloe believed in. But I knew one thing. The truth cannot be hidden forever. And if Michael had built two parallel lives, I would be the one to make them meet. The days leading up to the investor reception passed more slowly than usual. On the outside, my life went on as normal. Going to work, attending meetings, coming home for dinner, talking with Michael about ordinary things. But inside, all my thoughts revolved around one thing: the upcoming Friday night. That would be the moment when all the facades began to crack. At the office, Chloe seemed happier than ever. She constantly talked about the upcoming reception with unconcealed excitement. One morning, as soon as I put my bag down, I saw her sitting in front of a small mirror, applying makeup. "Hannah." "Yes?" What color dress do you think I should wear to the reception? I sat down and looked over. What are your options? Chloe opened her phone and showed me a few pictures. A red dress, a white one, and a dark blue one. I looked them over. Go with the white. It looks more elegant. She nodded. I think so too. She smiled, her eyes lighting up. Michael said, this event is very important to him. I asked softly, so he'll probably be very busy. Yes, Chloe said, but he still wants me to come with him to introduce me to everyone. I nodded. Once again, a strange feeling rose within me. Chloe completely believed she was stepping into a serious future with that man. She had no idea that somewhere else in this city, that man still had a legal wife. That afternoon, I left work earlier than usual. Not because I was tired, but because I needed to prepare a few things. I drove to a large mall downtown. After parking, I went straight to a boutique. The dresses hanging on the racks sparkled under the lights. A sales associate approached me. Are you looking for a dress for an event? I nodded. Yes, I have an event on Friday night. The associate smiled. Do you prefer a glamorous or a more subtle style? I looked around. Glamorous. A few minutes later, she brought out a few dresses. I chose a long black dress, simple in design but very sophisticated. When I tried it on in front of the mirror, I looked at myself for a long time. The woman in the mirror was no longer the same person I was a few weeks ago. Her eyes were calmer, sharper. I bought the dress. Then, I stopped by a salon and made an appointment for Friday evening. When I left the mall, it was getting dark. My phone vibrated, a text from Michael. I'll be home late tonight. I read the message and turned off the screen. I didn't need to guess where he was. Probably having dinner with Chloe or discussing their new project. But it didn't matter anymore. When I got home, the apartment was dark. I turned on the lights, placed my shopping bags on the table, and went out to the balcony. The city below was as vibrant as ever. Cars moved continuously, their red and yellow lights forming long streaks on the roads. I wondered, among the thousands of people moving out there, how many were living stories like mine, stories of trust, betrayal, and cleverly constructed facades. Around 10:30 p.m., the front door opened. Michael walked in. You're not asleep yet? Not yet. I turned back from the balcony. He looked at me for a few seconds. What are you doing on the balcony? Enjoying the city view. He smiled faintly. It's been a while since I stood out here too. He came out and stood next to me. We both looked down at the brightly lit city. I've been a bit busy this week, he said. The investor reception is on Friday. I nodded. You mentioned it. Michael turned to look at me. After that, things should progress well. Your project? I asked. Yes, he said with confidence. If we secure the funding, the company will grow very quickly. I nodded. Good luck, Michael smiled. Thanks. We stood there in silence for a while. He didn't know that in just a few days, that very reception could become the biggest turning point of his life. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't fall asleep right away. I thought about the upcoming Friday night, about the conference room at the Riverside Hotel, about the investors, the partners, and about the moment Michael might see me walk in wearing the black dress I had just bought. I didn't know exactly what would happen after that, but I knew one thing. When the truth comes out, no one can pretend that everything is still okay. I closed my eyes. The night before, a storm is always quiet, but that very quietness is the sign that everything is about to change. Friday night finally arrived. Throughout the day, I worked almost on autopilot. The meetings, the emails, the marketing plans all proceeded as usual, but my mind was almost constantly on the evening ahead. The moment I had been waiting for weeks. In the afternoon, as I was getting ready to leave the office, Chloe turned to me with an excited look. Hannah, yes? I'm heading out early to get ready for the reception tonight. I smiled. Have a good time. She beamed. Thanks. Chloe packed her things and left the office. As her figure disappeared down the hallway, I sat still for a few more minutes. A strange sense of calm washed over me. No more nervousness, no more anxiety, just the certainty that tonight, everything would change. I left the company about an hour later. Before heading to the Riverside Hotel, I stopped by the salon as scheduled. When I looked at myself in the mirror after my hair and makeup were done, I saw a very different version of myself. The woman in the mirror was no longer the person who had naively believed her marriage would last forever. Her eyes were calm, sharp, and seemed prepared for any possibility. I put on the long black dress I had bought a few days ago, threw on a light coat, and drove to the hotel. When I walked into the lobby, it was almost 8 p.m. The grand lobby was brightly lit, the tall glass panes reflecting the sparkling lights. I asked the concierge for the conference room for the Stonebridge Capital event and followed the long hallway to the event area. The door to the conference room was slightly ajar, and I could hear the chatter of many people from inside. I paused for a few seconds before stepping in. Inside the room, about 30 people were standing in small groups, talking. A long table was set up at the front with the Stonebridge Capital logo displayed prominently on the screen behind it, and in the center of the room, Michael was talking to a group of investors. He was wearing a dark blue suit, his face confident, that familiar smile on his lips. Beside him was Chloe, in the white dress she had asked my opinion on a few days ago. She stood very close to him, looking every bit his partner in both work and life. I stood at the doorway for a few seconds. An event staff member saw me and approached. "Are you here for the event?" I nodded. "Yes." She smiled and handed me a blank name tag. "Could you please write your name?" I took the pen and wrote 2 words. Hannah Cole. Then, I walked into the room. At first, no one noticed me. People were still chatting, exchanging business cards, and laughing about investment projects. I slowly walked around the room, observing everything. Michael hadn't seen me yet. Chloe was talking to a young female investor, her face radiant, as if tonight were a major milestone in her life. I walked over to the refreshments table and picked up a glass of water. Just then, Michael turned his head. His eyes scanned the crowd and then landed on me. In that instant, I saw his face change. The smile vanished. His eyes widened, and his whole body seemed to freeze for a split second. I smiled faintly, then walked straight toward him. A few people around us started to notice, perhaps because they sensed the unusual change in the event host's expression. When I stood in front of him, Michael still couldn't say anything. I spoke first. "Hello, Michael." My voice was so calm that even I was a little surprised. Chloe turned to look at me. Hannah. She seemed surprised to see me here. I looked at her, then back at Michael. "Aren't you going to introduce us?" Michael was silent for a few seconds before finally murmuring, "What are you doing here?" I smiled. "You're hosting such a big event, and you wouldn't invite your own wife?" The room around us suddenly grew quieter. A few people nearby started looking our way. Chloe looked at me, then at Michael. "Wife?" Her voice trembled slightly. I turned to her. "Yes, I'm his wife." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Michael took a step forward. "Hannah." I looked him straight in the eye. "Weren't you going to tell everyone?" Chloe took a step back, her face pale. "Michael, what is this?" Michael didn't answer right away. I looked around the room and then said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I apologize if I'm interrupting the event, but perhaps before we discuss investments, everyone should know a small piece of information." I gestured toward the screen behind Michael, where the Stonebridge Capital logo was still displayed. "The founder of this company is my husband." A wave of small whispers spread through the crowd. I continued, "And one of the company's shareholders is the woman he has been having an affair with for the past 3 years. The room fell completely silent. Chloe stood frozen, her face as white as a sheet. Michael looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and panic, and I just stood there, calmly, watching it all unfold. Because finally, the truth was out. The conference room was almost frozen solid after my announcement. No one was laughing or talking anymore. No clinking of glasses, just eyes shifting toward us. Some people in the crowd started whispering to each other. The investors who had just been discussing capital were now looking at Michael with scrutinizing expressions. Michael stood before me, his face taut. I could clearly see the panic in his eyes, an emotion I had never seen in our 7 years together. "Hannah," he said in a low voice, "let's go outside and talk." I shook my head. "No need. We can talk right here." Chloe stood beside him, still holding her glass, but her hand was trembling so much that water sloshed over the rim. "Michael," she looked at him. "What is she talking about?" Before Michael could answer, an older man from the investor group spoke up. "Excuse me." He looked at Michael. "She said she's your wife." Michael was silent for a few seconds. I stared at him. "Tell them." He took a deep breath. "This is a personal matter," he said to the investors. "It has nothing to do with the project." A few people in the room exchanged glances. I smiled faintly. "Nothing to do with it?" I turned to face the room. "I apologize if I'm making everyone uncomfortable, but you should probably know that a portion of this company's seed money came from our joint marital account." A few murmurs rose immediately. A younger man asked, "What do you mean?" I looked at him. "I mean, the founder of this company used his family's joint assets to invest in his new venture without telling his wife." Chloe turned sharply to Michael. "You told me you were single." Her voice was on the verge of breaking. "You told me you've never been married." Michael clenched his fists. "Chloe, I looked at the girl in front of me. In that moment, I didn't see her as the person who broke my marriage. I only saw a woman who had just realized she had been living a massive lie." "You didn't know?" I asked, gently. Chloe shook her head. "No." Her eyes turned red. "He told me he lived alone." Michael stepped closer to me. "Hannah, stop it." I looked at him. "Why? Are you afraid of everyone knowing the truth?" An investor standing nearby whispered to the person next to him, "I think we should reconsider." Another nodded. "I agree." The atmosphere in the room began to change drastically. The people who had been enthusiastic about the project were now taking a step back. Michael realized it. He turned to me, his voice lower but filled with tension. "You're ruining everything." I looked at him very calmly. "No, you're the one who ruined everything." I opened my purse and took out a stack of papers I had printed. They were copies of the bank transfers from our joint account. I placed the stack on the table. "Here are all the transfers, totaling over $150,000. All of it was sent to the second shareholder of this company." A few people in the room stepped closer to the table to look. Chloe also looked down at the papers, her face growing even paler. "You transferred money to me from your wife's account?" Michael didn't answer. The older investor shook his head. "I think we should adjourn this meeting for today." Another person said, "That's right. This needs to be clarified." One by one, people began to leave the room. The investor reception atmosphere vanished in minutes. Michael stood in the middle of the room, his face ashen. Chloe looked at him with eyes full of hurt. "You said you loved me," she whispered. "You said we were going to get married." Michael walked toward her. "Chloe, I can explain." She took a step back. "Explain what? That you have a wife? That you've been lying to me for 3 years?" Tears started to fall down her face. I stood a few feet away, saying nothing more. At this point, the truth spoke for itself. Chloe looked at me. "Ma'am, how long have you known?" "For a few weeks." She lowered her head, tears dripping onto her white dress. "I didn't know. I really didn't know." I nodded slightly. "I believe you." She turned to look at Michael one last time. "You didn't just betray your wife. You betrayed me too." With that, she turned and walked out of the conference room. The door closed behind her. The room was now empty except for me and Michael. He stood still for a few seconds, then looked at me, his eyes filled with rage. "Are you satisfied now?" I looked at him calmly. "Not yet. But at least now everyone knows the truth." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "You think you've won by doing this?" I shrugged. "This isn't a competition. This is just the consequence of what you did." He said nothing more, just stood there, looking at the emptying room. As for me, I turned and walked out of the conference room. My marriage had ended long before tonight. I left the conference room with the door still ajar behind me. The hallway of the Riverside Hotel was much quieter than the room where the storm had just hit. The sound of my heels clicked softly on the polished stone floor. I walked slowly, not rushing, not looking back. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, watching my reflection in the bright steel. My face was calmer than I expected, no tears, no explosive anger, just a very clear feeling that a chapter of my life had just closed. When the elevator reached the lobby, I stepped out. The San Francisco night was as bustling as ever. Cars passed by, yellow lights stretching along the street by the bay. The city kept moving, even though my life had changed so much in just a few hours. I stood in front of the hotel for a few minutes, taking a deep breath. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah. I answered. "It's done," I said. Sarah was silent for a few seconds. "Are you okay?" I watched the traffic flowing in front of me. "I'm okay." Sarah let out a soft sigh. "What happened?" I briefly told her about the conference room, about the look on Michael's face when he saw me, about Chloe's reaction, and the investors. When I finished, Sarah chuckled lightly. "You know, that was probably the most memorable investor reception of his life." I managed a small smile. "Probably," Sarah asked. "What's your next move?" I looked up at the night sky. "Divorce." Sarah said immediately, "I'll help you. The documents you collected are very important." "I know," I said. "He used our joint money to invest in the company and support someone else." Sarah nodded. "That will work in your favor." We spoke for a few more minutes, then hung up. I walked to the parking garage, opened my car door, and sat in the driver's seat. But before starting the engine, I looked at my phone one more time. There were 12 missed calls, all from Michael. I put the phone on the passenger seat without calling back. Some conversations were no longer necessary. I drove back to the apartment. When I opened the door and walked in, the familiar home was as quiet as ever. But the feeling inside me was different, no longer heavy like in the first days of discovering the truth, but instead, a light, empty relief. I went out to the balcony. From here, I could see the river sparkling with lights. The night breeze blew, making my hair sway gently. 7 years of marriage, 3 years of betrayal, a few weeks to bring the truth to light. I didn't know what the future held, but at least I knew I had chosen to face the truth instead of continuing to live a lie. Around midnight, the front door opened. Michael walked in. He stood in the living room for a few seconds, then saw me on the balcony. "Hannah," his voice was hoarse. I turned around. "You're back." He walked out onto the balcony. The air between us was heavy, but no longer as intense as in the conference room. Michael looked at me. "Did you have to do that?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Did you think I had any other choice?" He was silent. I continued. 3 years. For 3 years, you lived 2 lives. You lied to me, and you lied to her. You used our family's money to build a new life." Michael clenched his fists. "I was going to tell you." I smiled faintly. "When? After you bought the condo? After the company secured funding?" He didn't answer. A long moment later, he said quietly, "I'm sorry." I looked at him for a few seconds. That apology came too late. "Let's get a divorce," I said, my voice very calm. Michael closed his eyes for a few seconds. "You've already decided?" "Yes. Sarah will contact a lawyer." He nodded slowly. No arguments, no begging, just 2 people, standing before an end that they both knew was inevitable. Michael went back inside first, and I stayed on the balcony for a little while longer. Looking down at the brightly lit city, I suddenly realized that sometimes ending something is the only way to begin again.